Hi boys and girls, it's Grandma Sue from Iowa Gymnast, and today I'm going to read you a book about Curious George. He's a monkey. You're going to like this. This is George. He lived with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey, and he always was very curious. He was a good little monkey, even though he was curious. George was alone this morning looking at a picture. He loved to look at picture books. And when the doorbell rang, it was, it was the mailman. "Here is a letter for you," he said. "Put it on your friend's desk and he'll read it to you when he gets home." It was not often somebody sent a letter to Curious George. So maybe he could write a letter himself. Top drawer of the desk, there was paper and ink and a fountain pen. And he began to write, but the pen was dry. Oh, darn. What's he going to do with the dry pen? It needed ink. George would have to fill it. He got a funnel from the kitchen and started pouring ink. But instead of going into the pen, the ink spilled all over and made a big blue puddle on the floor. It was an awful mess. Quickly, George got the blotter out from the desk, but that was no help. The puddle grew bigger all the time. George had to think of something else. Why, soap and water, that's what you clean up with. From the kitchen shelf, he got a big box of soap powder and poured all the powder over the ink. Oh boy. Sorry, my cat is liking my story too. Then he pulled the garden hose through the window. Oh boy, what happens when you put water on soap powder? And sure enough, he opened the tap and sprayed water on the powder. I know what he's going to have now, don't you? He's going to have a whole bunch of bubbles, I bet. Yep, there they are. All kinds of bubbles. And they made a great big lather of more and more bubbles and a bigger and bigger mess. Oh my goodness. And that's all in the house. In no time, the whole room was full of lather, so full indeed that George had to escape in a hurry. Where is he? Oh, he's going out the window. When he was safely out of the house, he first turned off the tap. But what next? How could he get rid of all the lather before his friend came home? George sat down on the grass, and he thought for a long time. Finally, he had an idea. He would get the big shovel and shovel the lather out the window. I wonder if that's going to work. But where was the lather? When he looked in, while George had been outside thinking it had all turned into water. There was no more bubbles. Now the room looked like a lake, and the furniture looked like islands in it. Isn't that funny? Look at the wastebasket. The shovel was no use. A pump was what George needed. Don't you think he needs a pump? Yep. To get the water out, he needed a pump, and he knew just where to find one. He had seen a portable pump at the farm down the road. The farmer was away working in the field. Nobody noticed George when he got the pump out of the shed. It was heavy. He would need to pull it all the way back to the house. So that's what he was going to do. He's going to pull the pump back to the house. Maybe he could tie the goat to the pump and make her pull it. But just as George was about to slip the loop over the goat's head, he was hurled through the air and landed near a pen full of pigs. Uh-oh, the goat pushed him over by the pigs. The biggest pig was standing near the gate. What if George opened the gate just enough to let him out? A big pig could easily pull a small pump. Carefully, George lifted the latch, and before he knew it, all the pigs came out. Look at them. The pigs are running all over. Oh no. They were squealing and grunting and trying to get away as fast as they could. George was delighted. He had never seen anything like it. For the moment, all his troubles were forgotten. But now the pigs were all gone, and not a single one was left to help him pull the pump. They all ran away from the pump and away from George. Luckily, there were cows grazing nearby. Cows were gentle and strong. It would mean nothing to a cow to pull the pump for him. This time, George was right. The cow did not mind being tied to the pump. She even let him climb on her back, and off they went. George was glad. Now he would soon be home, pump out the room, and everything would be all right. See, he's up on the cow's back. I wonder if everything's going to be all right. What do you think, boys and girls? Meanwhile, the farmer and his son had heard the squealing of the pigs. They rushed home from the fields, and they had their hands full catching all the pigs. Not until the last pig was safely back in the pen did they have time to look around. And what did they see? A little monkey riding on their cow, making off with their pump. Oh, that's funny. What's the farmer gonna do? The chase was on. George and the cow were ahead at first, but the pump was slowing them down. The farmers were getting closer and closer. Now they had almost caught up with them. But where was George? Uh-oh, look, he's not on the cow's back anymore. What happened to him? Here he was, hiding in a shirt. The farmer, where was I? Here he was, hiding in a shirt. The farmers had run past him. But on their way back home, they had to come back on the same road. George did not feel safe in his hiding place. Just then, a truck came rattling down the road. George jumped aboard the truck. Monkeys are good at jumping, and was gone before the farmers had a chance to see him. See? He's getting in the back of the truck. The truck drove to a part of town that George had never seen. At last it stopped in front of a large building. It was the museum. George did not know what a museum was. He was curious, and while the guard was busy reading his paper, George slipped inside. Uh-oh, he wants to go in the museum. He walked up the steps and into a room full of all sorts of animals. At first, George was scared, but then he noticed that they did not move. They were not alive, and they were stuffed animals put into the museum so that everybody could get a good look at them. In the next room, George saw something so enormous it took his breath away. It was a dinosaur. He looked at the dinosaur and then at the baby dinosaur. And then he saw the palm tree full of nuts. George liked nuts. Suddenly he felt very hungry. He had just missed lunch that day. He would climb up, and just then he heard footsteps. He had to hide again, but where? Where do you think he's going to hide this time? A family came in to take a look at the dinosaur. See the family? They paid no attention to the little monkey who was straddling, who was standing there. The monkey did not move. He stood so still, they thought that he was one of the stuffed animals. George was glad that they weren't when they were gone. Now he could pick up the nuts. He climbed up the dinosaur's back and started to pull. But the nuts would not come off. George did not know that they were not real. He pulled harder and harder, and the tree began to sway. Crash! Down came the tree on the dinosaur's head, and down came the dinosaur. And from all sides, George saw what was going to happen. And underneath the fallen dinosaur, that's where the little monkey was. They pulled him out of there and brought him to Professor Wiseman, who was the director of the museum. Professor Wiseman was terribly angry. "Lock that naughty monkey up right away," he said, "and take him back to the zoo. He must have run away from the zoo." Oh, he was really mad, wasn't he? I hope George is okay. George was carried off in a cage. Oh, see the cage? And George is in it. Suddenly the door opened. "George!" somebody shouted. It was his friend, the man with the yellow hat. "There he is up there. It seems you got yourself into a lot of trouble. But maybe this letter here will get you out of it. It's from Professor Wiseman. He needs your help for an experiment. I found it on my desk at home, but I couldn't find you anywhere. So I came over here to talk to the professor." And this is what the letter said. Okay, I'm going to read. Here's the letter, and I'm going to read it to you. It says, "Dear George, a small spaceship has been built by our experimental station. It is too small for a man, but could carry a little monkey. Would you be willing to go up in it? I have never met you, but I hear that you are a bright little monkey who can do all sorts of things, and that is just what we need. We want you to do something nobody has ever done before. Bail out of a spaceship in flight. When we flash you a signal, you will have to open the door and bail out with the help of the emergency rockets. We hope that you are willing and that your friend will permit you to go. Gratefully yours, Professor Wiseman, Director of the Science Museum. That was quite a letter. How exciting. So you are George, Professor Wiseman said. If I had only known. Of course, everything will be forgiven if you are willing to go. They got the smallest size spacesuit for George and all the other things he needed for the flight. Then they helped him put them on and showed him how to use them. When everything was ready, a truck drove up with a special television. These are the things that George needed before he could go on the spaceship. One small spacesuit, one space helmet, one oxygen tank, 2 emergency rockets, and 1 parachute. The special television screen was mounted on the truck, and it was there to watch the flight. They all got on and were off to the launching site. They checked all the controls of the spaceship, especially the lever that opened the door. George tried it too. The great moment had come. Look at George is in the spaceship. George waved goodbye and went aboard. The door was closed. Professor Wiseman began to count. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! He pressed the button and the spaceship rose into the air, slowly first. See them watching it go? And then faster and faster and higher until they could no longer see it in the sky. But on the screen, they saw George clearly all the time. See, they're looking at a screen and they can see George in the spaceship. Now, the moment had come for George to bail out. Professor Wiseman flashed the signal. They watched the screen. George did not move. Why didn't he pull the lever? In a few seconds, it would be too late. The ship would be lost in outer space with George in it. They waited anxiously. At last, George began to move, slowly as if in a daze. He was groping for the lever. Would he reach it in time? There! He had grabbed it. The door opened and hurrah! George was on his way. See? That's a parachute. Out of the blue, an open parachute came floating down to earth. The truck raced over to the spot where George would land. What a welcome for George! Professor Wiseman hung a golden medal around his neck. Because, he said, you are the first living being to come back to Earth from a space flight. And on the medal it said, to George, the first space monkey. Then a newspaper man took his picture. See? And everyone cheered, even the farmer and his son, and the kind woman from next door who had worked for hours to get the water out of the room. Look at all the people that are so happy. I'm proud of you, George, said the man with the yellow hat. I guess the whole world is proud of you today. It was the happiest day in George's life. The end. And there's George with his medal. That was a great story. Thanks for listening, boys and girls.